Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod. I am your host, Alex Goldberg. With me, as always, is Dr. Justin Quinn. And we have a special guest here to preview the upcoming Houston Rockets-Boston Celtics matchup that will be taking place this weekend. Very spooky. Lots to get into. Ben DuBose from Rockets Wire. Ben, how are you doing, man?
Doing well, guys. Y'all ready for, well, I guess you have a game before Saturday night, right? Because it's
true.
The second game of back-to-back for the Celtics.
A critical in-season tournament game one against the Philadelphia 76ers rematch from the first game of the season for Boston. Should be a good one.
Has Boston been swept by NBA Cup fever yet, or is it still Patriots season?
You know, the Pats are kind of rolling right now,
right.
So I'm guessing it's probably more that. But you know the thing about the Cup, right? Once it's Cup time, everybody locks in, including
of course,
Boston Celtics and everybody else involved. So I know I'm going to be locked in. The Cup is everything. We're excited to talk about a little bit of that, a little bit of the upcoming Rockets matchup. I've been kind of following the Rockets a little bit this season. They're a pretty fun and interesting team, to say the least. Dr. Quinn, what's going on a little bit closer to Houston in Mexico City?
Well, I was thinking about doing something about my hair. It's looking kind of thin. We could talk about that later.
Yeah, no, if you need some inspiration, I think I know a guy who's, been kind of going through some of what you're going through and might be able to offer some support there. In this episode, we will be talking about hairlines, rebounding, a lack of rebounding, Jayson Tatum's recovery, and mostly how Boston has been doing and how Houston has been doing and what we can expect on Saturday. Let's just jump right into it. We start with the news. The big news, the Boston Celtics are now 2-3 since we last recorded. They're sitting on a 2-game win streak after an 0-3 start to the season. That includes some bad losses at New York and Detroit, and some pretty good wins in New Orleans and at home for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So let's kind of get into it. We'll start with you. Ben, did you watch any of these games or at least get a general sense of what was going on here?
I've gotten a sense, but I did not watch them live. Highlights and box scores.
Gotcha. Well, then we'll kick it to you, JQ. So let's start with the losses. Obviously, we recorded recently after they had just lost to Philly in their home or in their season opener, and then they subsequently dropped at New York and at Detroit. What are the things that went wrong in these matchups?
We already mentioned it, but it wasn't just the rebounding. The perimeter defense was not great. The rim protection was also not great. The conditioning could have been better. There was some real struggling to get up shots by the end of the game. It was, as one might expect, if you trade away 3 former All-Stars and a high-level rotation player and replace them with, bare minimum guys who are just starting out their NBA careers. We were all on the cliff, I think, starting to think about AJ DeBanza maybe a little bit earlier than we should have. But considering how things looked to start, particularly in a game that Joel Embiid barely played, and when I mean barely played, I mean he was on the court, but he barely played. So
yeah,
when seeing all that stuff, it was not very promising.
There's 2 things that jumped out to me, which is that at least defensively, the Celtics had a point guard problem at this point. I think it's pretty fair to say that. Now, obviously, they handled business against Cleveland, but Cleveland was notably missing their starting point guard in Darius Garland. That being said, Boston, this is an issue that has popped up even when they were good, frankly, or at least championship contenders. Dribble penetration, particularly shifty guards like Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, and Kane Cunningham have always given the Boston defense problems. And with this version of the Boston defense in particular, they really struggled in some of those matchups. Of course, we've been banging the drum of the rebounding. It has to be said that Boston's rebounding margins have been horrendous to start the season. I believe they're dead last in defensive rebounding, which is not what you want. These teams, particularly big physical front courts with Jalen Duren and Karl Anthony Towns have been doing a really nice job of cleaning up on the glass against the Celtics. Ime Udoka has been, I think, fine. But in general, Boston is running with a pretty undersized lineup this year, and they're struggling with that. And listen, at the end of the day, basketball is a game about making shots, and the Boston Celtics, at least in those 2 games, were not making a lot of them. The perimeter shooting was pretty woeful. And in general, Peyton Pritchard and Derrick White, I think, have been volatile, to say the least, to start the season. It seems like Jaylen Brown and Sam Hauser are kind of rounding into form. But those 4 guys are by far the best perimeter shooters on this team, or at least the most consistent. And if they're not all hitting, or if some of them are not hitting, there's going to be some nights where this offense is going to look pretty ugly. Now, that being said, we also have to talk about some good stuff. Obviously, the New Orleans Pelicans are no great shakes. They are 0-4 as of this recording, and things are getting dark in New Orleans with regard to the fan base. But the Cleveland Cavaliers fancy themselves a finals contender, and they've had a pretty good start to the season. And yet Boston solidly defeated them the other night. A couple of things that jumped out to me. Obviously, the starting for Josh Minott, who was deep bench guy in Minnesota and now figures to be a substantial rotation player in Boston. That was pretty significant, particularly in the Cleveland game, where he had a really nice game. I believe he had 10 points, 11 rebounds, helping to address some of their front court issues, as well as a couple of pretty impressive, just physical, athletic plays. Jaylen Brown has been the one consistent good thing for Boston in basically every game that he's played this year. He's just been getting, and he needs to be for them to win, to be clear. He's been consistently putting up big numbers and leading the dance and running the offense. And we're going to see more of that, I'm sure. Bench also got going. Sam Hauser, in particular, had a really nice game against Cleveland. In general, they're looking a little bit more robust. JQ or Ben, either one, I'll kick it to you. What can we take away from these wins against the lowly Pelicans and the fairly strong Cleveland Cavaliers?
Yeah, I wouldn't take much from the Pelicans game. I checked out after the Rockets finished. They had an early game last night because they were playing in Toronto, where obviously the Blue Jays are playing in the World Series. So it was an early start. And so I watched the second half of the Nuggets-Pelicans game and saw the Nuggets go on a 29-2 run at one point. So yeah, it's a struggle in New Orleans for sure. I will say, and I watched these games from a Houston perspective, but the box score for Celtics Cavs definitely made me sort of raise my eyebrow when I saw the 21 of 57 from 3, because, and we'll get into this when we talk about the Rockets, but one of the deficiencies for Houston early in the season is 3-point volume, and that because they run more double big, which means they have to, go zone a little bit. The Rockets tend to give up a lot of threes. And also because they go double big, they don't shoot a ton themselves. Now, they are very good from an accuracy standpoint, but Kevin Durant, as good as he is as a scorer and as a shooter, he's never been a super high volume guy from 3-point range. So the Rockets do find themselves at a math disadvantage. It really got them in the close loss they had to the Pistons last week. And so that's one thing when I saw the Celtics go 21 of 57 that made me sort of raise my eyebrow, because that could be favorable. Now, maybe it's offset by the fact that Celtics will be on night 2 of a back-to-back. So maybe there's some tired legs. We'll see how many go in. But yeah, the math disadvantage for the Rockets, that could be a problem. And it's something that I'm sort of, going to do when I watch the game on Saturday night. It's going to be a theme that I'm looking out for.
JQ, what did you think of the 2 wins? What do you see there?
Well, I saw a desperate team facing an equally desperate team that was actually poorer prepared in their front court rotation to win in the NBA, in the absence of Zion Williamson, which is its own recurring theme in the league, that definitely is not making their start to their season any better. But the Pelicans game, I feel like it was like when you take the top off of a boiling pot and like all the steam comes off, like all the tension just kind of like melted away from the Celtics players. You could see how palpably relieved they were by getting that win. And I didn't really think too much of it other than this is going to be good for them and make this season watchable, which for a second, it didn't look like it was going to be a watchable season, like at least in the sense of like enjoying the basketball rather than what ends up coming down the road because of it or because of not it. But as far as the second win over the Cavaliers, that one impressed me the most because we really saw Joe's vision for this team for the first time, I think, actualized on the court in a fairly coherent manner, in that the team really did rebound. They beat the Cavs despite them being a bigger team. And there's an argument to make that they're not, that the kind of bigs that are on the Cavs roster are not exactly the kind of bigs that give Boston's bigs, particularly Keta, issues. And that's a fair take, but the fact that they nearly doubled them up on the offensive boards, I think 11-18, if I remember correctly. That really stuck out to me as they have the energy and conditioning and effort and will now to play against higher level teams and not fall apart. And they got lucky with the Cavs. We have to remember that not just Darius Garland, but Merrill was out and somebody else was out for them as well. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but Max Strus. How could I forget? With that much firepower missing, plus them not really looking like they were connected very well in that game, it was kind of like a perfect storm to beat them. But if the Celtics are going to actually finish around 500, they're going to need to beat some of those teams on those kinds of nights. Most of the teams that are worse than them, and about half of the teams that are around on their level. And so far, that's about what they're doing, just not with the teams we kind of expected this to happen with. So I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I do want to give a special shout out to Josh Minot, who was not only did he have a pretty solid impact rebounding and general physical play, he really did a great job on Evan Mobley, who a lot of people have been pegging as a kind of breakout star for this year and who has had a pretty nice start to the season. I do kind of wonder because it seems like Missoula is still doing some tinkering. It seems like for now the starters of Pritchard, Brown, White and Keta seem to be pretty set, but that fifth starter spot still seems like it's a little up in the air for Boston. And I think there's a case to be made that Minot, just from a physicality and defense and rebounding standpoint, might be a good fit there, especially if Chris Boucher's minutes are going to remain kind of inconsistent. All this being said, where do we see the Celtics as it stands right now? They've had some good moments. They've had some not so good moments. Seems like they're still definitely figuring some things out, but some things are starting to come into shape. I'll just go quick hitter takes. We'll start with you, Ben. What do you think of this team?
I think it's better than the perception. I mean, you look, and granted, the sample size is small, but they're top 10 across the board in net rating, offensive rating, defensive rating. Now, it's nothing that'll jump off the page, or it's 7, 8, 9 in most of these categories, but obviously the extent of the wins against the Pelicans and especially the Cavaliers, influences that data. But so far, so good in a season where the expectations are obviously, pretty muted with Jayson out for all or most of it. Then, if you're competitive, if you're, hovering in the range of 500 and posting good metrics, to me, there's not a lot to complain about in the big picture when you consider the obvious headwinds, both in terms of the injury and the financial things.
Yeah. JQ, what do you think?
Well, I think that what Ben said about the team is largely my impression and what I projected this team to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500. Injuries, other unpredictable things could definitely emerge to shake that kind of a thing up. But I think that the important takeaway is not whether or not this team is winning a lot of games. It's whether they are finding the tools for future seasons that they are really looking for. I think your point about Minot is a very good one in that regard. I also think it's important. You mentioned earlier that there is a point guard problem. Derrick White slumping. Peyton Pritchard is playing better, but also kind of slumping. Anthony Simons has only looked comfortable in his role once. It seems like there's a bunch of guards that don't quite know how to play together. And I think that's normal. I think that's going to continue for a little bit longer, 3, 4, 5 more games maybe. And I don't think we should worry about it because we need to see, for example, if Pritchard can be a starting point guard. and it's going to be ugly some nights. So
Yeah.
you got to be a little more patient.
It's true. There are going to be some nights where this team makes you want to tear your hair out, so to speak. And with that brilliant segue, we're going to talk about the other big news item in Boston for the Celtics. Of course, we would be remiss if we did not address, and to his credit, he also addressed Jaylen Brown's balding allegations, the scandal that is enrapturing Boston Celtics media at this time. Jaylen went on Twitch the other day, confirmed that he is indeed losing some hair and that he was indeed applying fake like hairspray, hairline, something or other that was rubbing off on, Amen Thompson's jersey, among other things. This is a devastating moment for Jaylen Brown and for Boston Celtics fans generally, but he handled it well. Among other things on Twitch, he blames the stress of playing in Boston, fighting for a championship, dealing with the media, generally, everything that comes with that as a result of his hair loss. Has to be said, I know I have some informed sources that I will not reveal on record who are suggesting that tension alopecia from his braids could have also played a role in this.
That actually is a thing.
Yep. He called, in situations where young players and, guys like Jaylen might be struggling, they often turn to vets for advice. In this case, he turned to LeBron James, who he left a voice memo or a voicemail to asking for his advice regarding hair plugs and restoring hairlines. Turkey was mentioned, and that was subsequently mentioned on the broadcast for the Cleveland Cavaliers game as well. That being said, Jaylen's production has not been affected by his loss of hair. If anything, he's looking quite good. I guess I'm wondering, let's throw this out there. Do we have a Derrick White scenario in play? Of course, people remember Derrick White famously shaved his head and then had a career best season leading to a Boston Celtics championship. Do we think that something like that might be in the cards for Jaylen now with his hair loss? Ben, I'll kick it to you.
Crazier things have happened. I will say I've thought about this subject, not because of Jaylen Brown, but my wife and I, we've been watching the baseball postseason a little bit the last couple of weeks. She's more of a casual sports fan than I am. And George Springer and the Blue Jays have obviously been on a run. And as we're recording this, they're one win from actually winning the World Series. And of course, we watch and wish Springer well because he came up through the Astro system and had lots of great moments here in Houston. And he's 36 and he is now balding. And so he's a couple years younger than us, but not dramatically. It's one of those, like, it feels like you sort of grew up with him. And so it's hit my wife. It made her a little bit sad seeing, that George Springer is now late 30s and balding. I mean, it happens to everybody or most people from time to time. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. But what I will say is that George Springer had an incredible home run in Game 7 of the ALCS to send the Blue Jays to the World Series. So if a balding George Springer can do that, is there any reason why Jaylen Brown can't do something special?
We're going to turn to our bald correspondent here in Dr. Justin Quinn for his expert opinion as well. Do you foresee a Jaylen Brown production spike as a result of his hair loss?
Well, it really depends, I think, because at least in my own case, the reason I don't have any hair is a friend of mine got leukemia, and I had long hippie hair in my long-haired hippie college. So I shaved it off to try to convince him that bald looks good on people. And hey, I mean, doesn't it?
There you go.
No,
holding it down.
But seriously, I was in grad school for I think 7 years before I shaved my head for that. And then I got my degree less than 2 years later. So you do the math.
There seems to be a pretty interesting consensus emerging here. I'm not sure I'm ready to take the leap yet, but check back with me in a couple of years. We'll see. Jaylen also refused to acknowledge any sort of tanking dialogue on his Twitch stream. The subject was brought up and abruptly swatted away. So clearly Jaylen is concerned about his hairline, but he's not concerned about the Celtics' ability to win basketball games.
Maybe fines. I think he can be fined for that.
He could also be fined for that. And, he probably will need that extra money considering that the flights that he might be taking in the near future. The other Jay was in the news as well. Jayson Tatum interviewed with our good friend Noah Dalzell It was a good interview for Celtics fans who haven't read it already. Most of you probably have, but you should check it out. Among other things, he discusses the Celtics' extremely strong support, even now without him in the lineup, on the road, his charity work in Boston, his love for St. Louis and the rehab that he was doing there. I continue to believe that if for whatever reason St. Louis is ever awarded an expansion franchise, we are in some serious trouble as Boston Celtics fans. I'll just throw that out there. But for the time being, Jayson Tatum seems like he is making the most of getting off really nice fits on the sideline and interacting with the various Celtics fans at home and on the road. The only other piece of news that is worth talking about today, the Boston Celtics exercised their third-year $2.74 million team option on Baylor Shireman per Scotto. What do we think? Ben, I'll kick it to you first. First off, do you know who Baylor Shireman is?
I do not, actually. So I will not be.
Yeah, this seems to be the problem. No one knows who he is unless you are a Celtics fan, and we need people to know who he is by what he's doing.
It's true. Baylor Shireman, 30th pick in what was it? The 2023 NBA draft, I believe. 24. No. Yeah, was 24. That's it.
Yeah.
Was he on the
title? He was a rookie last year. No.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, no, that's right. I think he was on the title team as a rookie.
We are experts. Listen to us, please.
We're definitely experts. Yeah. But because it's the third-year option.
Yeah, he was not on the title team. He was the 30th pick in 24.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, he was so he's 25 now, and he was drafted and he was about to turn 24, so he was pretty advanced.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and Brad Stevens has done that in the past, has taken older college guys.
Richard.
So what do we think? Is this the right call, exercising this team option on Baylor? Justin, I'll swing it to you first.
I mean, what do they have to lose? He's got fundamentals that are there. You can squint and see the outline of an NBA player. He just has to put it together, and you would like him to do that, considering, as we have established, he's 25 years old. But there's some time left, maybe not a lot, but I think there's a rotation player in there.
Well, and I'll just say, speaking very broadly, but in the Celtics financial situation, you need to hit on as many rookie scale contracts as you can. So I think if there's any path at all, then having, it's not just picking up the third-year option, but it keeps the door open to picking up the fourth year as well if he proves worth it. And if you can get anything close to a rotation level hit at that type of salary, that can be really, really huge. So as I see it, it's worth the gamble.
Absolutely. I think that's right. And, for what it's worth, I am not exactly clamoring for Baylor Shireman at this time. He hasn't really done anything in the NBA that has jumped out to me. He's had a couple of games where he's hit some threes, but there's still a ways to go before he's rotation ready. The defensive stuff is not quite there. He still feels like there's some rotation issues, and also he does get kind of lost in space a little bit. And offensively, if he's not hitting jumpers, it's pretty hard for him to see minutes. But what better year than this year to see what you have with Baylor Shireman? So may as well. That's it for the news. We're going to swing it into the next section of the pod where we talk a little bit more in depth about the Rockets, the Celtics, what they've done so far, and what that matchup is going to look like. But first, we do have to swing it to you, Ben, for the signature part of this podcast. Yeah, that's right, folks. It's the steal. Ben, you get to take over the podcast, and you get to ask us a question or just rant about anything that you want to talk about. It can be basketball related, Rockets related, your life related, whatever. You've got it. Steal the pod.
So I'm going to take Justin back to April of 23 when we last did a pod together. And it was when the Rockets were in the middle of their coaching search, and the two finalists were believed to be Frank Vogel and Ime Udoka. In hindsight, I think it's pretty clear the Rockets made the right choice. But I had Justin on to present the Boston perspective on Ime. I had Caitlin Cooper on to provide the Indiana perspective on Frank Vogel. Obviously, Frank's been a few other places, but I'm a huge fan of Caitlin. So if I have an opportunity to get her on, of course, I'm going to do that. But needless to say, the 2.5 years since have been very positive for Ime and the Rockets. He took over a team that was 22-60 last in the West. They were 52-30, second in the West last season. So a 30-win improvement, jumping up 13 spots in the standings. It's not all the coaching staff. Obviously, they used their money wisely. They accrued some financial flexibility. They brought in really good bets like Fred VanVleet, like Dylan Brooks, like Jeff Green. They made good trades. But Ime is a big part of the culture and sort of reestablishing the foundation after some really lean years. And now this year's team, it's a very interesting model, and we'll get into it in a few minutes. But they currently rank first in the NBA in offense, and they rank 19th in defense, which is a very un-Ime Udoka-like breakdown. So, Justin, I'm curious your thoughts. You know, I'm sure Celtics fans watch Ime, if nothing else, just out of curiosity. It's not like, I don't want to say Celtics fans are pining for him because Joe Mazzulla won a title. Like, let's not, this is not trying to victory lap, oh, Ime Udoka is better than the coach you have. No, it's not saying that. But I'm sure there's some curiosity because obviously Ime did take the Celtics to the finals. He was, it was the first big achievement of his coaching career. And then obviously the fallout that led to him losing his job was not great. So for a lot of reasons, Ime Udoka was a headline grabber in Boston. And so I'm just curious, is there anything that you see Ime Udoka doing better in Houston than he did in Boston? Is there anything the last few years that surprised you? Is there anything that when you look at this Rockets team now that you say, I didn't think he would do that based on what he did in Boston?
Me personally, the first thing that comes to mind is the elephant in the room, which is just professionalism.
Well,
the big concern for at least me, I'm not going to speak for anyone else on this podcast, but for me at least, I was pissed off. I was pissed off that the Celtics had a great coach, because he is a great coach other than that aspect, which, is part of coaching. I hate to say it, but following institutional rules kind of important, right? And for me, the big question was, if he gets another chance, how is he going to conduct himself? Is he going to put this behind him quietly? Is he going to be like vocal in his ownership of his transgressions? He was pretty vocal at first, and then he moved right into doing what he's doing. And for me, that was really the only major question, because it was very clear from what he did in Boston very, very quickly as well, in terms of getting cohesion and defensive capabilities up to a championship level with them, that he's a very good coach. So I'm not at all surprised by what he's done in Houston so far, but being able to see that particular aspect of his past did not linger, I think, is the most important thing for both him and his success in Houston. And I'm not going to make light of the situation, because it was not a good situation on a number of levels, but I'm happy that the Rockets and the Celtics have all been able to move past it.
There are two things that jump out to me just as a kind of observer of the Rockets. I do try to catch Rockets games from time to time. They're kind of one of my teams of interest this year. But the things that jump out to me that Udoka is doing now that I think he kind of wasn't doing as much in Boston, the one big one is he's trusting his young players a lot more in Houston than he was in Boston. Udoka, I think at Boston, also, it has to be said, the roster was older for the most part. You have Al Horford, you have at that point Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown were both solid vets, Marcus Smart, Derrick White. But Udoka really did not play the young guys much at all during his tenure in Boston. Peyton Pritchard, for example, really struggled to get minutes. Sam Hauser barely saw the floor. And again, part of that is roster construction and the way that, Aaron Nesmith barely played. This Rockets team is younger by design. They're just more young players. But Ime is also giving them a longer rope, I think, to try stuff and make mistakes within reason. Obviously, Reed Shepherd is not an Ime Udoka style player, and I think that's going to be a hard fit. But, seeing like Jabari Smith Jr., for example, who I think is having a nice season now, but he's been volatile, to say the least. He's had his ups and downs. Seeing Ime be a little more patient with him, be a little more patient with Alperen Şengün, I think that is really paying off in a big way and has helped them to become a more effective team. And then offensively, I think the thing that jumps out to me is that actually what's working for Ime is leaning even more heavily into the stuff that he was doing in Boston from an X's and O's standpoint, playing two bigs and absolutely crushing teams on the rebounding margins. I think that's a signature part of kind of the way that he structures his teams. And I think, with this Rockets team, the personnel also helps a lot. But in the stuff that I have watched, it's not like the Rockets offense is particularly like fluid. It's not like it's, the ball pinging side to side like a Steve Kerr offense or a Greg Popovich offense. But what it is ruthlessly effective because they get a lot of shots up. They have efficient scorers in Kevin Durant and Şengün and others. And more importantly, they just dominate the offensive glass in a way that makes it incredibly hard to defend them. And over the course of a game, really breaks down defenses. I think that physicality and the kind of the strength that they play with has led to a really successful offensive season. And the big thing for me is also, this is less to do with Udoka and more just, it's clear that Amin Thompson and Alperen Şengün have taken significant leaps as players. They're both just much better at basketball. Şengün seems like he's playing with a much more patient, kind of well thought out demeanor. He's kind of picking his spots, but he's also being a little more aggressive and trying to score for himself. And Thompson developing not only his shooting, which is better, but really his ability to score off the dribble and score in a variety of ways has completely unlocked this offense. Obviously, also adding Kevin Durant helps any offense, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. I guess I'm curious, Ben. Yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's always tough to see with regards to the young players, how much of it is truly the coach's philosophy and how much of it is situational. As you mentioned, some of it could be that Houston was just in a different place as an organization. The roster was a little bit different. But I also wonder, Ime did not exactly have the most leverage in the world coming off the scandal in Boston. And so I almost wonder if, the Rockets, as part of the hiring process, said, hey, if we're going to take the gamble, if we're going to take the leap of faith, you need to trust us. Here's the guys that you need to, work to develop. We don't want to short circuit this process. And again, I'm not saying I've heard that, but that's just, it's a plausible explanation. And so that could be part of it as well, is that, the Rockets had some leverage. If they're going to take the leap of faith, then there could have been some conditions. Hey, here's how we're going to do it. We need to develop these guys, and not all of them have developed, but for the most part they have. And so maybe it's Ime doing it of his own volition. Maybe it's circumstantial. It's hard to say, but it does strike me as very different compared to how he managed that veteran-laden Celtics team in 21-22, which did have some young prospects. Obviously, look at what Peyton Pritchard has turned into since, but didn't get a lot of run at the time. And then to conclude it with a rant, I brought up Ime, but it is so bizarre to me, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, this coach swap that feels like it's going on between Houston and Boston sports, like actively now.
over and over again.
Celtics, Alex Cora with the Red Sox, previously with the Astros. Bill O'Brien from the Patriots to the Texans, then back to Boston College, which has turned into a complete disaster. You can go
Mike
back.
Vrabel, Texans coordinator.
You can go back 10 plus years and Kevin McHale, former Celtics great, obviously coached the Rockets at the start of the James Harden era. So it is so strange, but in all three of the big sports, somehow there's this back and forth between Boston and Houston coaches and Boston legends and Houston legends that I don't know how to describe it, but to this day, it keeps on happening.
We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the pod, hint, hint. But let's get into kind of what things look like right now for Houston and Boston. So obviously they're playing on Saturday. Should be noted that we might not be seeing these teams at their fullest and best selves. There are a lot of injuries that are affecting definitely the Rockets and the Celtics. Obviously, there's one really big one with the Celtics, and we'll see what they look like after a back-to-back. So last season, of course, Boston Celtics lost their best player in Jayson Tatum in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then Houston, of course, lost their lead point guard in Fred VanVleet to start the year right towards the end of the offseason. So obviously Boston, kind of resetting this year with Tatum likely out for it. at least some of, if not all of this season, shedding salary, cutting down their talent, and moving to a slimmer, lighter, generally, kind of thinner team. And then Rockets, on the other hand, kind of went the opposite way this offseason. They pushed some chips to the middle. They got Kevin Durant, the biggest available name on the market, who they acquired in a trade that, frankly, it's not shocking given that Phoenix had no leverage, but it's still kind of shocking to see Kevin Durant traded for Jalen Green. And what was the rest of the pick pack?
Dylan Brooks and pick 10 in this year's draft, which was an okay draft, but nothing particularly special.
Pretty shocking to see a first ballot Hall of Fame lock top 25 player of all time being traded for that, even with Durant in his older years here. They, of course, pushed in the chips for Kevin Durant. Many people anointed them as a legit finals threat after that, but then the VanVleet injury kind of got some people, including myself, a little cold on Houston. They still have some pretty difficult cap sheets to work out in the near future. So I guess actually, let's start with kind of where these teams are at, not necessarily in terms of like their play this season, but kind of broadly as franchises. With Houston, there's been a lot of rumors that Houston still has the assets available with a bunch of young players and picks to make one more big swing trade to try and get over the hump. But why is that? That's not quite as simple as it's being made out to be. Ben, could you give us a little more context for that?
Right. The Rockets are pretty diligent with regards to doing deals only when it's the right value. And especially in like the modern second apron NBA, it's really important to be able to get these cheap rookie scale deals. We talked about it just a few minutes ago with the Celtics picking up the option. And so the Rockets are going to be careful with these premium draft assets that they have. And what's really valuable is that the really good assets they have, they aren't their own. So it's not like they have to be bad to reap the rewards of these unprotected picks. No, they've got unprotected first in 27 from the Suns and the Nets. The Nets definitely look like they're going to be bad. The Suns could be bad. Now the Nets is a swap, but obviously they're going to exercise the swap unless there's just like insane injuries, because certainly a year from now, the Rockets should be still a lot better than the Nets. And then they have an unprotected 29 from the Suns as well. Also an unprotected 29 from the Dallas Mavericks, although the Mavericks outlook no longer is quite as bad since they lucked into Cooper Flag, unfortunately. But still, the two unprotected Suns first and the unprotected Nets, those are pretty valuable for a Rockets team that, as their current young core, guys like obviously Alperen Sengun, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, hopefully Tari Eason, Reed Shepherd progress and advance into their second contracts. The team is going to get a lot more expensive. We'll see how long Kevin Durant wants to play, but at 37, he hasn't really shown any signs of decline just yet. So the bottom line, it's going to be a very expensive team. And so those picks are pretty valuable in the modern NBA because you can sort of fill out your roster around the big contracts with cheap rookie scale labor. And so that's why a deal really needs to make sense, because the Rockets don't want to just go, they don't want to become what the Suns had, ironically, with Kevin Durant. They don't want to box themselves in, go above the second apron, and then have no further avenues to improve the team, because you get what we've seen in Phoenix the last 2 years. So that's why, even though the Rockets have these assets, they would do a deal if it's the right deal. At the same time, look, they like the team they have now. And one thing that's been thrown out to me, and I do genuinely think they believe this, it's not just PR spin. After losing Fred VanVleet, the floor is lower, but the ceiling isn't. In that, if they're going to be a contender this year, it involved leaps from younger players. You mentioned Thompson and Sengun. Perhaps as the year progresses, you see Reed Shepherd get better, Tari Eason, and they're only going to get more opportunities and more touches right now. I mean, Amen Thompson is fully running the show as your point guard right now. Alperen Sengun is basically working as a point center and initiating the offense. It's really fascinating to watch how they run their sets, because they don't really have a traditional pick and roll type point guard. So it's not like they're running pick and roll with Sengun or giving it to him on the block. No, a lot of it comes down to giving it to him 35 feet from the bucket and letting him make plays, or running inverted pick and rolls with Sengun as the primary ball handler. So it's a very interesting team, but the upside is still there, especially with Kevin Durant still at an all-star level of player. And so if they're good enough as is, and the team's about to get far more expensive, a lot of the superficial analysis says, hey, like, they're really good, but are they quite to the level of the Thunder? Obviously, defending champions, 168 games. They look like a juggernaut. And if they're not, then push your chips into the table and make that all-in move to get, I don't know, maybe it's a point guard, maybe it's something else. Right now, the weakness appears to be on the defensive side of the ball. But for the Rockets, like, the appeal to getting Kevin Durant was that it opened the contending window earlier, but it didn't shut it any faster. And what they mean by that, it gets back to exactly what you were saying with the price of the deal. Because they didn't give up all that much to bring Kevin in, it sort of opens the window earlier. It gives them an ability to win at a high level this year that they wouldn't have had if they just ran it back with Jalen Green. But it doesn't take away the end of this contending window. It doesn't make that come any sooner. And so that's why getting the deal done on their terms was really important. If you recall, Woj first mentioned in June 2024 the Rockets and Kevin Durant as a potential pairing. It took almost a year because the Rockets were insistent doing it on their terms. And so to spin it forward to today, and I think there's some similarities with the Celtics, the Rockets are a very measured organization. They're not going to do something just based on vibes or because they really feel like this year is all that important. Like, it's got to make sense, not just for the short term, but for the long term as well. And so if the right deal presented itself and it checked all the boxes and the timeline fit was there and the asset cost wasn't extravagant, would they consider doing something to further upgrade this team? For sure. But I don't think you will see them make a panic move. And I think that reminds me of the Celtics. And perhaps it's because, obviously Ime is from Boston. Several members of Ime's staff are from Boston, and they do have a say in personnel here. Both of these organizations strike me as very, obviously, analytically inclined, very measured in their decision-making. And so I think it's sort of, is shown in how both the Rockets and the Celtics are responding to these, not to compare Fred VanVleet to Jayson Tatum. Fred VanVleet's a very good player. Jayson Tatum's a great player. But in both cases, I don't think you saw just an all-out panic to where, the Celtics had to make some moves for financial reasons, but they were probably going to have to do that anyway. In terms of, anything drastic, I'm sure the Celtics took calls on Jaylen Brown and, kicked around some bigger things, but they're not going to do it just to do it. They're not going to panic. And it's sort of been the same thing with the Rockets and Fred VanVleet in that, they're going to see how things progress these first few months. They can't really make any moves now because they're up against the first apron. They used the non-taxpayer MLE to bring in Dorian Finney-Smith, who hasn't played. So if you want some optimism, I mentioned the Rockets being, really good on offense, mediocre at best on defense. Well, they lost VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, and Jalen Green from last year's team. And one of the big ways that they were going to, backfill that was they signed Dorian Finney-Smith from the Lakers. Well, Dorian Finney-Smith had offseason ankle surgery and he has not played yet. So the hope is that when he gets back, that'll lift the defense to a more passable level. And obviously he was like a net rating wonder if you look at the on-off splits with the Lakers last year. And so that might help them. But when they signed Dorian Finney-Smith, that hard capped them at the first apron. Now, as you get closer to the trade deadline, December 15th, guys who sign contracts in the offseason can be traded. The Rockets can create a little bit of wiggle room. They are going to have a disabled player exception for VanVleet because whoever the NBA appoints is likely to say that he's done for the year, even if the Rockets aren't conceding that just yet. So there are options that the Rockets can pursue, but they're not going to panic. They're going to take their time, in part because they have to, because they are up against the first apron. But also, look, they genuinely want to give opportunities to these younger guys. And I don't think it's a given that they do anything drastic at the trade deadline. Like, I genuinely believe they are open to maintaining the status quo, seeing where it leads, and if they have to wait until next offseason to consider anything larger, then they're okay doing that. And that reminds me a little bit of the Celtics in that back in May and June, you heard all this talk about what might happen because of the Jayson Tatum injury. And ultimately, it wasn't anything too huge. And I could see it sort of being the same thing in the aftermath of the VanVleet injury, even if Fred obviously is not to the level of Jayson Tatum as a player.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the X's and O's of managing this kind of post-VanVleet injury world, because you alluded to it earlier. There's been some Amen Thompson running point. There's been some Alperen Şengün point center. There's been a little bit of Reed Shepherd here and there. There's been some Tari Eason here and there. Kevin Durant, obviously one of the elite all-time individual shot creators. But, in what little I have watched for the Rockets this year, there have been times where the offense, despite, again, being effective, has looked pretty clunky. And so I'd like to dive a little more into that. What are you seeing as far as the Rockets' attempts to replace VanVleet and his role in the offense? How's it working, and does it feel sustainable?
The starting lineup does. Now, I do worry a little bit about... So Steven Adams has been in and out of the starting lineup, but he's basically a starting level player. It's just depending on how the opponent stacks up, the Rockets might want to start a wing like Josh Okogie or Tari Eason that has a little bit more defensive versatility at the start of a game. But Steven plays a huge role, and so I do worry a little bit at his age and mileage and injury history, how is he going to hold up over 82 games? And so if you try and run the double big formula without Steven Adams, that's something that I do worry about a little bit. Like, they've tried some double big with Şengün and Clint Capella, and it hasn't looked as good. So the health of Adams is a big variable, but they're so big, they rebound the ball so well, and they do play at a faster pace, which has been really beneficial to a few guys when it's a man at point rather than Fred VanVleet. So I honestly think, assuming health, it looks clunky. You're not used to seeing a starting lineup that's that big, and you're not used to seeing a center in Alperen Şengün do a lot of the initiating himself. But I think for this group, it actually works. What I worry about is Reed Shepherd and the role they need from him off the bench, because if you look at the on-off differentials, the net ratings, so Houston has a 9-man rotation, and 8 of the 9 have positive net ratings. 7 of the 9 have net ratings of at least +9, which is insanely good. And then the 1 of the 9 that does not have a positive net rating is Reed Shepherd at -7. So it's pretty clear where the deficiency is for the Rockets. And look, it's nothing like crazy to be alarmed by, because he's just 21 years old, year 2, he's undersized. So you can, Boston fans have been through the Peyton Pritchard experience and the developmental curve there. I know you guys know what it was like the first couple of years. So it's not easy to step into that role, but yeah, he gets hunted when he's in the game defensively, and offensively, he hasn't been bad as a shooter, but he's just been okay. And at his size and at his profile, he really needs to be clearly above average as a shooter to work out as a high-level NBA player. And so I think long-term, he'll be able to figure it out. Like, there's a lot of data that suggests he's a really good shooting prospect, but is he going to be able to figure it out this year while having his minutes sort of up and down, depending on how he's playing, and with all the expectations that come from playing at least a rotation role on a championship contender? I don't know. And so to me, that's the big question. Like, they do have Aaron Holiday that they can turn to, but Aaron's a solid bet, but he's no one that you want to, give a 20+ minutes per game role to in April and May if the Rockets are serious about trying to contend for a title next spring, which I think they are. So the big question for me is Reed Shepherd by the end of this season going to be capable of, maybe not every night, but at least on occasion, being a 20 to 25 minutes per game? Let's be honest. Let's call him the Peyton Pritchard clone. Like, is that realistic for Reed Shepherd by the end of this season? I don't know if it is. I hope it is. I'm not going to say it's not, but based on what we've seen to this point, there's a long way to go. And so to me, that's the big question. Like, the starting lineup, at least to the extent that they're using it, I think it's doable. But I do think there's some matchups you'll need the more traditional point guard, and that's where they're turning to Reed Shepherd right now. And that's where you really feel the absence of VanVleet, is that before Fred was hurt, they would give Reed some minutes, but he was almost a luxury in that if Reed hit this year, great. If not, if he's still a year or two away, then whatever, it's not a big deal. Well, now the way the team is constructed, you sort of have to give Reed every opportunity. I won't say he's looked terrible. There's been a few moments here or there. Then he's made some good plays, and you can see the talent. So it's not all bad. But yeah, that's the source of apprehension for me. Is a 21-year-old Reed Shepherd, largely unseasoned, ready in year 2 to get closer to what the Celtics have in Peyton Pritchard? And if he's not, if he's still a year or 2 away, what moves can the Rockets potentially make by January or February to try and address that? To me, that's the big question.
C's entered the year with some big questions of their own. Obviously, the biggest question around the Boston Celtics, are we going to see Jayson Tatum at any point don the green and actually step on the court this season? There's been some media scuttlebutt, and Jayson Tatum himself has alluded to the idea that he's going to try and come back at some point this year. Ben, are you buying or not? And do you think this is a good idea?
I think it depends on what the team's record is at the time and the state of the Eastern Conference. I think that's the biggest variable. I do think that if Jayson is medically cleared, and to be clear, the Rockets are going to be going through some of these same considerations with Fred VanVleet. They have not ruled him out for the season. And I've heard from both the Rockets and Fred's camp, like they are hopeful that by March or April, it could be realistic. It'll take some luck, but they're keeping the door open. And so I'm a believer that if he's cleared and if the player feels confident, like there's risk going to work every day that we could be hit by a bus. Like I don't believe in shutting it down simply for the sake of shutting it down. If the player feels confident, if he feels like himself and the doctors say he's cleared, then I'm open-minded to it. Like I'm not someone that would say just wait until 2 seasons out to give him, 16, 17 months, whatever it is. No, that's just a number. Like there's no real significance to 16, 17 months. That's just sort of convenient based on the calendar. Like there's no, to my knowledge, medical significance to that exact amount of time. It's just a little bit more linear. And so sometimes fans and media point to that. However, I will say in both cases, it's going to depend on exactly how the team looks as you get closer to the end of the season. And I think that if it's not realistic by the middle of March, and if the team isn't at a point where they could realistically make some noise in this scenario where things go well, then at that point, the upside just isn't there for it to be worth it. And so, yeah, to me, the two big variables are where the team is at in the standings and the point in the calendar when the guy is cleared. I think it's got to happen by, I would say, mid-March at the latest, because it's just not realistic, these scenarios where you bring a guy back like 2 games before the playoffs. No. Like there's an integration process. There's building back up. Ideally by the All-Star break, and if not bring him back by that point, at least start the phased, ramp up of physical activity. But I think at the latest, I would say about a month before the season ends. So there needs to be time for the player to build back up, regain chemistry with his teammates, because they will have played a certain way for 5-6 months. And then the team needs to be at a point in the standings where there's actual upside. If there isn't much based on how the team is playing at the time, and or if there just isn't enough time on the calendar for the player to, build back up a little bit, regain chemistry with his teammates, because both of these teams have changed a little bit since the Rockets last saw VanVleet, since the Celtics last had Tatum. To me, those are the two big variables. I am open-minded to it. I don't see any medical reason why, if the Celtics are having a good year and Tatum is cleared and he feels ready to go, I don't see any medical reason that you would say, no matter what, I'm not going to let him play. But there are circumstances where it doesn't make sense. So I guess that's the balance as I see it for both the Celtics with Tatum and the Rockets with Fred.
I'm real curious where that number of like 16-ish months comes from, because like to me, it has always been around that like length of time for that kind of an injury. But as you said, from what I've read, there is no medical reason for it. Yet, like I was talking, NBA Mexico is happening this week, and people from the league office are here. And one of the people from the Latin American office and I were talking about that. And like, I swear to God, he thought I looked like the most insane person he's seen this week. Just bringing up the possibility that he can play this week or this year. And he cited the same thing. So it's like, it's something that seems to be deeply ingrained in our collective subconscious that this is how long you must not be in the NBA if this injury happens to you. And I'm curious why that is.
I think a lot of it's because these injuries tend to happen more late in the year in the playoffs, in part because of the mileage, the wear and tear, the high leverage. And at that point, especially if it's a bigger name player, it doesn't end up being worth it to rush the recovery because many times, the team is in a bad spot after that injury. And so for the reasons we just outlined, it doesn't really make sense to push the envelope. So for multiple reasons, the logical play is to push it until the ensuing season. It happens to be 16, 17, 18 months because these injuries tend to happen in March, April, and May, and the next season begins in October the following year. And so it just sort of becomes the norm. And so, yeah, I think, 9 to 12 months is the norm, but we all think of it in terms of, the schedules and the calendar for the sports that we follow. And I think just with the calendar of the NBA, it makes it to where, especially if these injuries that we're comparing it to happen late in the season, or in Fred's case, in the off season, then we just sort of in our minds build it up to where, hey, it's the next season, they're probably going to come back. And it just happens to be, especially with the wave of playoff injuries we had this past season, that, October, I still think October 26th is the safe bet, but it would not floor me if it was earlier.
So for the Celtics, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Their start has been kind of up and down. There's been some working in some pretty green rotation players there. And, the undersized front court after losing Horford, Porzingis, and Luke Cornett, all three in the offseason. And then, there's been some other concerns around their perimeter defense, around their kind of inconsistent shooting. I guess I'm curious. I know, Ben, you said you haven't watched a ton of Celtics this year, but just on what you have seen, what concerns do you have for this team, and what things do you think this team is poised to potentially be doing well?
The biggest concern I have is the rim protection. I mean, you mentioned the young bigs, but you take out, people didn't talk about them enough nationally, because I think when people look at this generation Celtics, they think Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford were just foundational type defensive pieces for all those years. And, even when you talk about the Celtics defensively, I think people looked at them more through the lens of Drew Holiday. But the Celtics were a really tough team to match up with inside, and that, there wasn't that dynamic presence, but they were never easy to score on. And so I think working in so many fresh faces that are young on the front line, it's pretty jarring compared to those veteran-laden Celtics squads that we've seen in the late 2010s, early 2020s. And that, to me, is, I wonder if maybe that's something, we'll see if Anthony Simons is long for the Celtics. Obviously, we know he's in the last year of his contract. If he eventually gets dealt, I could see, a defensive-minded big man being someone that might make sense, someone that ideally is cheap given the financial constraints with Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But, I could see that being a point of emphasis, because the Celtics just lost a lot of what I would call not just rim protection, but veteran savvy in the paint.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, is what sticks out when I look at this roster compared to the last few years, aside from the obvious absence of Jayson Tatum. But the good thing, like the perimeter pieces, I think Joe Mazzulla is a great coach to develop under in the modern NBA, because he gives you the permanent green light. We talked about, from a Rockets Celtics matchup perspective, the concern, the Rockets with the double big, not shooting a lot of threes, giving up a lot of threes, that being a potential problem against the Celtics, the way, Joe Mazzulla will not blink if you shoot 57 threes in a game, the way that Celtics did their last time out against the Cavaliers. Like, I think that's really useful for young players in the league, because so many of these guys coming out of college, there's a lot more structure. There's a way they're used to playing. And at the NBA these days, it's such a math league. It can be a little bit of a transition for these guys to adjust to the green light that, is involved with success at the highest level in the modern NBA. And so younger perimeter guys that have a 3-point shot, but may not want to, or may not be fully committed to it yet, I think Joe Mazzulla, in much the same way that, Mike D'Antoni last decade with the Rockets is perfect for the developmental programs of those types of players, simply because those players are going to have a freedom, those prospects especially, that they wouldn't have a lot of other places.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting style contrast between these two. Obviously, Ime Udoka's teams, and at least in Boston, did not shoot a lot of threes, and that still continues to largely be the case in Houston. That they tend to be pretty physical, paint-centric teams, really invested in owning and controlling the rim at both ends. And then, of course, Boston under Joe Mazzulla has swung pretty radically the opposite way, where they're very perimeter heavy and perimeter centric. Now, obviously, Houston's got some pretty elite perimeter defenders, which could swing this matchup. But it is going to be an interesting style contrast where Boston has been really struggling to kind of control the middle, but has been thriving on the perimeter these past few years. And Houston kind of dominates the middle, but has kind of had inconsistent shot making to some degree. Yeah.
Although I will say the Rockets to this point, and the obvious caveat of small sample size, but they're going to be an interesting case study for that modern NBA adage of, you're only as strong as your weakest link, because you would think like they have some top shelf defensive playmakers, as you mentioned, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith. These are really good defensive pieces. However, what's happened to this point, a lot of the time they're running either the double big, which as we mentioned, leads to zone, leads to the opportunity to put up a lot of threes, or they're playing Reed Shepherd. And so teams can hunt him. But as versatile as modern NBA offenses are, with the ability to, play 5 out and space the floor and, switch across the board, like on both ends of the floor, you can sort of funnel, well, on offense, you can funnel it to the weakest link. And then defensively, or I said that backwards. Defensively, you can funnel it to the other team's weakest link. And offensively, you can hunt the other team's weakest defender. And I think that's what we've seen a little bit with the Rockets to this point. Now, offensively, they've been okay because even if you force the ball to, I guess, their fourth and fifth options, well, Jabari Smith is very good as a fourth option. Like he can make shots, he can put the ball on the floor, he's developed as a playmaker, he's just 22 years old, so he's still getting better. So offensively, the Rockets are okay at that. Defensively, yeah, that's going to be interesting, not just for this game, but throughout the season, in that they do have the playmakers, but a good team can force the switch and can attack, be it the double big or Reed Shepherd, and try and get an advantage. So that's sort of the give and take there.
Who should start for the Celtics between Peyton Pritchard or Anthony Simons? I'll go to you, Ben, and then I want to hear your thoughts, Justin.
I go Peyton Pritchard. Like, I'm a big believer that what the Celtics have had the last few years is a big cultural advantage. And so I really like these guys like Pritchard and Keita, giving them opportunities to step into larger roles, especially because we don't know if Simons is even long for the team anyway. But I do think there's something to be said for Joe Mazzulla in Boston, Ime Udoka in Houston, rewarding guys that have been there, that have developed through the system for years, even if your team isn't quite what it was at its peak, obviously because of the offseason trades and Tatum's injury. I do think that there's a closer tie to the coaching staff with the young guys like Pritchard that have developed through the system. So if it's close, and I think it is, I would be on the side of continuity.
JQ?
I don't have too much to add because that's pretty much how I look at it as well. I think that Pritchard put up with a lot in terms of being buried in the roster, Ime Udoka, and that burying almost sent him to another team, right? He was pissed off about not being able to compete, not necessarily like with the team itself, but like his situation and knowing he could contribute more than he was currently doing. That leads me to feel very strongly that he should have the opportunity. Now, I've said elsewhere, and I do believe this, that there are going to be bigger backcourts where it does make sense to start Anthony over him, just, I think, to see how that will look. But I don't think that should just be like a glimpse of what you could pivot to if it continues to stagnate for another month or so. I think he deserves at least another 10 or dozen games, roughly, to at least try.
Yeah, I'm of two minds. I think for me, it's matchup dependent more than anything. And this is not a disrespect or shade to Peyton Pritchard at all, who I think has developed into a pretty fantastic player. I do think there is something to be said for Peyton Pritchard is a really, really good six man, and having him go against second unit ball handlers in particular. And, I think he can still close. I think he's still a very important part of this team. I think there is something to be said for Peyton Pritchard feasting on second unit guards as he has been kind of these past few years. And it does feel like right now he's kind of fits and starts. He was good in the Cleveland game, but he's had some dicey moments thus far. He's still kind of figuring out the best way to apply himself as a starter. I'm willing to give him a little bit more run for sure, but at least right now, there's definitely it does feel like the kind of instant bench offense to some degree is missing. And that's not even shaded Anthony Simons either, who I think has been pretty solid as well. But Pritchard really found a groove last year in his 6th Man of the Year campaign. We have on here who should start between Neemias Queta, Luka Garza, and Chris Boucher. And I would offer that I think that question is settled. Neemias Queta,
I think so too, but
yeah, dude, Queta has a net rating of like plus 20. I was looking at the stats and I was like, oh my god! I know it's small sample size theater, but he looks legit.
Yeah. I think Neemias Queta is the starting center going forward until otherwise noted. Chris Boucher is at kind of a weird start to his Boston career. Feel like he hasn't fully found his role yet. I still think he is potentially a pretty good player, but the minutes have been inconsistent, and he hasn't really popped in these games. Luka Garza seems like a fun hustle guy, but I just feel like the lack of offensive punch and the kind of defensive slow-footedness would make it really hard for him to be a legit starter. He can be potentially, I think, a fun bench guy, and it does have to be said, Luka Garza is a monster screener, which I am looking forward to. But I think for now, Queta is pretty settled into that starting spot. So a couple more things, and then we'll get out of here. There's been some scuttlebutt that if, things go south for Boston, which, could happen, they're probably an injury away from being in a pretty bad place, at least as far as their rotation is concerned, which most NBA teams are, but I think that's especially true for a thinner Boston team this year. And in those scenarios, there's a lot of talk about Houston calling up Brad Stevens and looking at potentially a point guard replacement for VanVleet that could help them on the defensive end. There's been a lot of Derrick White to Houston scuttlebutt. Derrick White, of course, is still an entrenched starter for Boston, coming off of a title run and generally beloved big extension. But of all of the players that could feasibly be traded from Boston this year, he probably has the most value, assuming that Jaylen Brown is untouchable, which I think is a fair assumption, both because of his importance to the team and also because, frankly, his contract is so massive that it's almost impossible to trade him to begin with. So Houston has been rumored as a possible Derrick White destination if there's a desire from Houston to go all in and try and win a title this year, and if Boston is in a selling mood by, say, February or so. Is there a structure that would work here for you, Ben, that would even be feasible?
Financially, yes, but it's all going to come down to how the Celtics view Fred VanVleet, because I don't see the finances working without Fred's contract. Yeah. Like, I just don't see the Rockets being able to get near the 30 million figure without giving up so much that it just doesn't make sense to them. So it would have to be, like Fred VanVleet, Tari Eason, and some sort of draft compensation. That would put you in the ballpark. Would also depend on, obviously, how the Celtics feel about Tari. Could they get an extension done with him? Because one reason why I do think the Rockets, they're not trying to trade him, but, if the right deal presented itself, I think they'd be at least open-minded to it, because the Rockets were not able to get an extension done with Tari prior to the rookie scale deadline earlier this month. So that at least has to, keep your mind open if you're Rafael Stone, GM of the Rockets. I think from a basketball perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But the difficulty, we talked about both of these organizations, the Rockets and the Celtics, being sort of firm in their valuations. And the Rockets are not going to look at Fred VanVleet as a neutral to negative asset. They still love him as a player. And just like with Jayson Tatum in Boston, he's not retiring. He's not going to not play basketball anymore. He might miss a season. And then the expectation, especially with modern medicine, he's going to be back and he should be fine. I mean, the Rockets are hopeful that VanVleet might even be back by the end of this season, just as the Celtics say the same with Jayson Tatum. So the Rockets are not going to prioritize. We talked about, the Kevin Durant trade. It only made sense for them on the right terms. And so the Rockets are not going to go to the other extreme and just say, well, Fred's out for 25, so we've got to do whatever it takes to get in someone that can help us win a championship this year. No, it's not about that. It's about the window being sustainable. It's not just about this season. And they are more than happy to just bring Fred VanVleet back a year from now and add him to this team that does, whatever it's going to do this season. At the moment, has the best offense in the NBA. So I think Derrick White is definitely a better player than Fred VanVleet. I don't think it's night and day. I would say for the Rockets, if you bring in Derrick White to the Fred VanVleet role, it's a moderate upgrade. They're the same age, and he's available in 25, 26, whereas Fred isn't. So that's worth some sort of sweetener. And so I could see, like Tari Eason and, 1 first-round pick, maybe 2 if it's not like the super desirable ones. But I don't think, like to give you an example, I forget who it was, but one of the national guys threw out the other day this hypothetical with the Spurs off to a great start and Dylan Harper looking really good as the point guard there. What if the Rockets traded, it was Fred VanVleet? Yeah, Fred VanVleet and 3 or 4 first-round picks, and I think one other prospect for De'Aaron Fox. And I'm like, no, the Rockets do not wait 2025 to 26 this season that heavily. Fred VanVleet is not just a trade exception here to where he's like an expiring salary. No, they really like him as a player. So ultimately, long story short, what it's going to come down to, what do not the Rockets, what do the Celtics think of Fred VanVleet? He's not as good as Derrick White, but he is still a very good player. Slightly different archetype, same age, but he's a little bit smaller, more of a traditional floor general. If the Celtics like him, Fred is president of the Players Union now, so maybe he's got good relationships with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I don't know. If the Celtics like him and they say, hey, we can swap White for Fred and get, a couple of sweeteners in there, like maybe Tari Eason and a future first-round pick. If that appeals to Boston, maybe. But I don't think it's going to be a situation where Fred VanVleet is just the matching salary, and then you're going to start from square one in terms of the assets. So the bottom line is, and maybe the Celtics are, maybe the Celtics are the type of team that would take Fred VanVleet given his injury, and that's already sort of the Celtics timeline with Jayson Tatum. This is already a year that, I don't want to say it's a throwaway year, but it's basically a gap year. Anything you get from this season and Tatum returning is a bonus. It's not your expectation. So I don't know. Maybe that makes Fred a reasonable fit for Boston in that configuration. I don't know. But to me, that's the big question. I think Ime likes Derrick White. Obviously, he had him for at least half that year and the full playoff run in 22. So I think the Rockets will make the call, but it's ultimately going to come down to how much Boston likes Fred VanVleet. Because if they don't like him, if they don't see him as a fit, the Rockets are more than happy to just, keep Fred and bring him back a year from now. That's how I see it.
The combination I was playing around with earlier was VanVleet and Eason for Derrick White and Baylor Shireman, and then the Rockets throw in one of those two, either the Brooklyn or the Phoenix pick from next year. To me, it feels like it would be pretty hard for Boston to ask for more than that as far as draft compensation. You're either getting 2 far off Houston picks or you're getting one of the Brooklyn and Phoenix picks. I don't think you're getting more than that.
I think that's potentially
and that still
reasonable.
That still feels like it would be potentially a tricky needle to thread. That would be pretty context.
I don't think they would do it. Just because we were talking about how much the Rockets really like VanVleet, the Celtics really like White. He likes them back quite a bit. If they were to trade him, I guarantee you they could find a bigger package than what they would be able to get from Houston. And that, I think, by itself is disqualifying. If they were super enamored with the idea of VanVleet, and as you pointed out, the timelines kind of work the way the injuries are going on both teams. And they looked at the whole, making space for Tari Eason's extension by, in the worst case scenario, Fred VanVleet being a lesser player than he was beforehand,
Yeah.
then I could see the pathway there. But I still think that there are teams that would probably, in less wise ways, throw
and
up
that's
more.
why it sounds good in theory, and I won't rule it out because on paper, like, yeah, Derrick White into the Fred VanVleet role would be really nice for this Houston team. But in terms of actually getting it to the finish line, like the Tari Eason part of the puzzle is really interesting as well. Because if he plays well enough to where the Celtics are confident, especially given the financial constraints that you guys have, if the Celtics are confident in saying, hey, like, we want this guy long term, we're willing to, give him, we're willing to do whatever it takes to give him that next contract to where it makes sense. Then if he's playing that well, why is Houston trading him? Like, that's the thing. And if Houston's trading him, is he playing well enough to where Boston would take on the financial risk? Like, that's the give and take. Like, it sounds good in theory, but in practice, like,
Tari could be a better player than Derrick in the
up.
long run. Yeah, like if he stays healthy and develops a jumper, he will be a better player in the long run, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so and if he has a good year and he's helping a Houston team win, like, is that a good trade for the Rockets? And that's before we go into, whenever they get Fred VanVleet back. So yeah, there's just so many moving pieces that it's not impossible, but I would say definitely unlikely just because a lot would have to line up. And it's sort of, to me, I'm skeptical that it all lines up.
It does have to be said that Brad Stevens was reportedly sniffing around Tari Eason at the draft. Just going to throw that out there. All right, let's get out of here. We're going to do a couple more quick things, and then we're going to move this thing along. Really quickly, 1 minute or less. JQ, I'll go to you first. How do the Boston Celtics win this matchup with the Rockets?
Play exactly as they did against the Cleveland Cavaliers and hope that the Rockets have a bad game, because the Rockets might be the best built team to give the Celtics front court problems. We'll see what happens though.
Ben, how do the Rockets beat the Celtics in this upcoming weekender?
They pound the offensive glass the same way they did in Toronto. They actually won the rebounding battle 64-29. We talked about Boston having some questions on the front line. So use Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams.
It's going to suck.
Pound the glass and hope that, as far as the 3-point disadvantage, hope that, the Celtics are on night 2 or back-to-back. Maybe those tired legs have some of those threes a little bit short.
God, that is just a crazy rebounding margin.
I know.
Holy smokes.
It's a weird team.
Yeah. What does a successful season look like for the Houston Rockets, Ben DuBose?
I think getting to it's so tough, but I'm still going to say no. I'll modify it. I'll say getting to the second round of the playoffs. Like, you have to get further than you did a year ago. I want to say Western Conference Finals, but if you don't ever plug the Fred VanVleet hole and he doesn't make it back, and you lose to, the Denver Nuggets in a competitive second round series, like, I don't want to say that's a failure. Like, after the KD trade, before the VanVleet injury, I would have said making it to the Western Conference Finals and, taking your chances against the Thunder. At this point, I think there's enough parity in the West to where, if they get jumped by a team like the Nuggets, it's not the end of the world, especially considering the Fred situation. But yeah, they've got to they already had a second seed and a first-round exit in Game 7 this past year. To feel good about this, even after losing Fred VanVleet, I think you've got to at least get to the second round to feel like that, that they're making progress.
Dr. Quinn, what does a successful season look like for the Boston Celtics?
Throw all those expectations that Ben was just talking about out the window, because for the Celtics this season, that's lagniappe, that's extra, that's icing on the cake, whatever metaphor you want to call wins, playoff success, that's all extra. What they need to do this season is come away with, hopefully, Josh Minot. Someday I'll get his name right. My God. Why not?
Why not?
Oh, Lord. But they get another player on his level-ish, right? A real rotation player by the end of the season. Maybe we see something for one of the draft guys, just like starting to do stuff up in Maine. Really, just like they come out of the season with 2 rotation players they didn't have at the start of the season. And the most important thing, which probably goes without saying, is whether he plays or not, that Jayson Tatum has no setbacks.
Yeah. I largely agree. I'm going to modify, though, a little bit. There's two paths for the Boston Celtics to be successful this year, and each path is radically different from one another. One is the path that you laid out, where they develop their young guys, they get some rotation players. Both paths rely on Jayson Tatum being healthy for the start of next season, but they develop some rotation players, and maybe they have a fun, low seed playoff run and throw in an upset here and there. The other path for the Boston Celtics to be successful is by, say, January or so, they decide that actually, AJ Dibanso might look pretty good in green.
I knew it. I knew you were going there.
Derrick White, Jaylen Brown. Hey guys, maybe we head to Cancun for a little bit. And there's two paths. It has to be said. For the Houston Rockets, I think there's one path for them to be successful. The Houston Rockets have Kevin Durant on their team. They should be trying to win the title. Like, with all due respect, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün, those guys are all-star level players now. If this trend continues, they have a stacked roster. They have a team that is ready to win. And I know they're young, and I know their championship window is larger for sure. And that's a good thing to have. Not saying that they should go all in right now. But Kevin Durant is not getting any younger. The expectation should be finals. All right, we're going to close things out per usual with our typical closer here. Something to remember or something to forget. So, Ben, how this works is you can pick, once again, just like the Steal, any topic from basketball, the Rockets, your life, what you had for breakfast this morning, anything like that. Something to remember or something to forget from today, this past hour, this week, this month, this year. JQ, you're going to model by going first. What's something to remember or forget?
So this is actually super relevant because it actually impacted the podcast itself. And it is impacting about 200 million users of Gmail who need to reset their password. If you have something important to do, make sure you do that well before, because otherwise, like this guy right here, you're gonna be like, how do I get back into Google and reset my password? We need to be doing stuff. So that's kind of bad. So if you are one of the affected people from that Gmail data breach, change your password as soon as you can. Make sure you have time to do it.
I got to remember to stretch my hip flexors. Feeling a little tight over here. I don't know. Been sitting for too long today.
Is that what that noise is?
Yeah.
I hear all those creaky noises.
Yeah, I know. I think that's probably what it is. Ben, something to remember, something to forget. What do you got? Close us out here.
I'll go offbeat. I mentioned the Boston-Houston sports connections. Something to remember, Red Sox signing Astros legend Alex Bregman. I know he'll be a free agent this offseason. I hope they keep him.
Would love to have him back.
It seems like a great cultural fit. It seems like, the fan base really embraced him. I know Alex a little bit. He's a really good guy. He seemed to be a good fit. Obviously, the Red Sox, I know they lost to the Yankees in the wildcard series, but overall it was a step forward for the organization. It was a good year. He seemed to be happy there. His family, it seemed to be a really good fit. So obviously I wish he would have stayed in Houston, but the Astros bringing back Carlos Correa at that spot makes it to where not as glaring of a hole as it was when Alex left. So I think it's one of those, it works for both parties, Astros moved on and got a satisfactory replacement, but appreciate Bregman for all he did. He seems like he's found a home in Boston. I hope he keeps it. It seems like a good fit.
Hopefully it works for John Henry too. If you're listening, John, please pay the guys. John, if you want your baseball team to win, you do have to pay them. Anyway, this concludes yet another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod. Ben, where can we find your work?
Yep. rocketswire.usatoday.com and clutchfans.net, where I am writing, blogging, podcasting, all that good stuff about the Houston Rockets all season long.
Dr. Quinn, where can we find your work?
That whole USA Today spiel he just did, just put Celtics Wire in front of it, or you found it, you're listening to it, you're watching it.
You can find my work on Blue Sky, Instagram, various other places, whether it's musical or whether it's podcast related. I'm just kind of doing things. Alex Goldberg. I play bass for Divine Sweater and a bunch of other things. Anyway, that's it. That wraps things up. That concludes yet another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod. Ben, Justin, we'll see you later.